Good day, Bsse2, and welcome to our online sync in our course subject, Places and Landscapes in a Changing World. We're supposed to have met last Monday and Tuesday, but it was moved because of some interruptions due to the visit of the president of the PNU system. Apparently, I wasn't able to find time to move it on Thursday and Friday because I have already an appointment. First, in Thursday, I have to go to the hospital. And then for Friday, I have another task. That's why I couldn't accommodate. Furthermore, I'm hoping that next time, if things won't be disrupted anymore, we'll be able to meet before the finals. Okay? For now, let us just begin with our discussion in order for us to be elated and enlightened with the discussions from the Places and Landscapes. These are discussions which is very important for students like you, especially you are enrolled with social sciences. Okay? Now, let me share first my screen so that you'll be able to see my presentation. Okay, so now let me open my slides. So what we are going to talk about today is about gender socializations in schools. So again, in part of the Places, Landscape, and Changing World, it is very significant for us to understand how valuable is gender in a society, gender in a population, especially that every society has its own definition on gender in its discussions with regards to gender equality. So this time we have to focus on how gender is being discussed and how gender is being deliberated in school setting, on how the school is implementing gender equality between the students who are enrolled probably in higher education or under the junior and senior high, or even at the in elementary. Okay. All right. So again, let's talk about gender socialization in schools. Now, so the outline of this discussion is that we have the definition of terms, gender socialization theories, or the theories behind how gender was associated and how gender had played a great role in developing and in making our students socialize and understand the significance of the gender that they are choosing with. Also, number 3, we have gender socialization in child-friendly schools. Okay. All right. So let's talk about sex versus gender. This is by definition. Now, sex is often used to refer to the act of mating between two organisms, an act which is a process of biological reproduction. So sometimes we call it as coitus, animal courtship rituals, and human foreplay. All right. It also refers to the two categories of animals, male and female. So usually when you take a look at the biodata, you'll be able to see their sex, right? Not gender, but sex. And your option is to choose whether it's male or female. All right. So we are being categorized based on the categories of our maleness or being a female. All right. How about gender? Well, gender is defined as the differentiated social roles, behaviors, capacities, and intellectual, emotional, and social characteristics attributed by a given culture to women and men, in short. All differences besides the strictly biological, meaning this is socially constructed by a culture or a tradition from the cultural group where gender is appropriated to, right? So there are societies who actually see gender in several ways, or see that the choosing of your preferred gender does not only rely on what was biologically given to us, where it has two limitations, right? The limitations of being a male or being a female. However, when we talk about gender, it's basically how a society accepts what kind of gender you are trying to accept to your own self, or you are trying to adapt to your own self. That is based on your choosing, right? But also there are societies in this in our planet, or there are several countries who do not really allow, or a culture who do not really allow or open with the idea of having multiple gender beyond male and being a female, right? So that depends on how culturally open a society is with regards to the acceptance on what gender um, is based on your choosing. Okay. On the other hand, the way a society is organized according to sex is referred to by some social scientists as the sex gender system. So again, how the society is organized and how the society construct what are the acceptable gender in that society or particular society is allowable or acceptable. All right. And we call it the sex gender system. So there is this system who actually tries to tell the people consciously or unconsciously that there are gender that we can probably choose to, or we are restricted to unfollowing, depending on how open or acceptable the culture is of that society would really matter on the way you are trying to appropriate yourself to that particular kind of gender, right? Okay, so we have masculine and feminine. Definition of masculine and feminine may vary from race to culture to another. For example, in one Brazilian tribe, women often see as the sexually passive partners are as sexually aggressive as men. Okay, in Filipino, view construction work as heavy labor fit only for men. In Thailand and India, it is a low-wage work viewed as suitable only for women. So again, being masculine and feminine is being defined culturally. There are races who actually appropriate femaleness or femininity, that this is for females' job. That because it's not hard labor, then this is only for female. Others also appropriated that when you work to this kind of setup, this is for male only because it pays low wages, right? So again, you will be able to see how a society construct the idea of being masculine and being feminine, and it gives us this connotation that there is inequality between the two sexes, right? If we're just referring to both male and female, especially if we include the other gender, right? Say, for example, we have the LGBTQ. How do we appropriate them if we say we include them in the workforce? Do they have a below average of maybe wages below than women because they are probably the third preference of gender? Or do they have better salary or wages because they are capable of being a man and a woman? So these are things that happens in our society, and basically it talks about inequalities, right? Because again, we can deny the fact that the world is basically, majority of it is a patriarchal society where male usually dominates, and there are just few countries or probably tribe that practice at least a lineage of matrilineal lineage, right? Or a matriarchy where a female rules. Okay. All right. So again, this is one of the issues up until today that we're facing off, because again, women and men they differ probably because that's what the society is trying to picture out, right? If you are not masculine enough, then you could not get better wages or better opportunities. Okay. All right, so masculine and feminine. Gender expectations also vary in a degree among different social classes within the same ethnic group. Professional woman versus woman working at a food processing factory, or social disapproval. Women's place in the home. There are women who are actually thought to be property classes versus working classes, right? So again, there are several expectations that a society is trying to put to the women. There are societies who are expecting women to be professional, but there are also societies that women are just a part of this workforce who doesn't really get a chance or opportunities to be a leader or to be a manager or to go beyond what is expected to that kind of society, right? So there are several social disapprovals. It's because the society that dictates what the women should do are actually restricting them from getting and acquiring the full potential of their dreams, right? And the full potential of their knowledge and expertise and skills, because the society does that. Okay. Also, gender changes throughout history. Example: women in pre-Hispanic Philippines and women during Spanish colonization. In pre-Hispanic Philippines, there are a lot of evidences portraying that women are actually as capable of men. One example is that Rahu Mabun's sister is actually a female warrior who actually work and fight alongside with men, right? Also, women in the early Philippines were given great respect with regards to position in the society. Of course, we have babaylan. The babaylan is like the bridge between the living and then to our gods at that time. And the babaylan is actually an elder who would put an emphasis of things before everybody will do it, right? So say, for example, a dato would consult a babaylan if they are ready to plant or to harvest their crops, or if they are ready, or if they could win the war against other villages. So the babaylan actually holds a very important role in an early Philippine society, especially in the Visayan area, right? But during the Spanish colonization, it shifted, it changed, because Spaniards, their women in their country are actually second class, right? So women in the Spanish society don't really have much of a say in that society because it's purely a patriarchal society. So they are second-class citizens who doesn't really have much of a voice when they wanted to, until, of course, it shifted over time and were given equal opportunity with men. But during the Spanish colonization, our Philippine women does the same thing with the Spanish women when they are in Spain, right? So most of the time, male do have all of the same inside the family, and just the female, or especially the wife, would just succumb to whatever the man wants. Okay, and there are just, of course, a few of them who actually have an opportunity to be as equal with men. But these women are most likely are just very few. Okay, but again, during the Spanish colonization in the Philippines, it shifted from the early Philippines, right? Because during the Spanish era in our country, women were just given very little opportunities, and they were acknowledged very less because of their gender. All right. All right. So these are just some of the examples. Culture, not nurture. So again, we are asked, where does gender come from? So we have culture, not nature. The idea that the product of a given society's adaptation to material conditions in which it finds itself. Accordingly, gender differentiation originates from the different function assigned to men and women, which in turn are based on their sex differences. This division of labor led to the development of difference in qualities in men and women differences, later enshrined as a natural or God-given. But apparently, it started right after human race shifted from a nomadic life into a sedentary life. During the sedentary life, people started building their own houses. They're not living in caves anymore and move from one place to another. They started building their houses near to their crops where they plant and where they raise their cattle or whatever kind of animals that they want to raise for them to at least get as much as protein that they want, right? But during the sedentary time, what happened was in many civilizations that men do hard labors because they usually go outside, plow the area, or go and hunt in the forest so that they could gather as much as meat as they want. While women were in charge of domestication in the family, right? Preparing for the food or gathering the food from the backyard, and then taking care of the children. And that started the division of labor between men and women. And then the society perceived that since a man does more of the outside work, which they think it's laborious, then men were given most titles of whatever they wanted in that society. That's why most of the societies have men leaders, elders of men, and most of the societies do have high regards of men's capability on building a society. With given, well, at least very little participation of female at that time, right? Because it started economically, right? So those who are actually earning more or getting more of the resources gets at least a better say on the decision making inside the family. And that shifted, and that actually expanded in a larger scope where human build the society and then eventually build the civilization. All right. So it started to really how culture develop over time. It's not nature, because our nature, both of us, are actually capable of doing anything, right? It's just so happened that when, well, history can tell us that the culture of particular society changes and develop how we perceive men and women, okay? And that started the struggle between inequalities of gender. All right, so moving on, we have to talk about socialization. Socialization is the process through which people learn and acquire the characteristics of the social group to which they belong. It is the process of becoming a full member of the society. All right, so it's a process of trying to learn and acquire every characteristics of the group that you belong to. So again, we have a larger idea of a society now. We talk about Philippine society, but prior to the establishment of one country, one nation, or one state, Philippines that we know of today are actually divided into several regions or several islands or several places or villages, right? And each of these villages or each of these of the minion think that their society is actually separate from the society that developed in Cebu or in Bohol or here in Mindanao, especially in Butuan or in Caraga region, right? Because our concept of society at that time is quite very regionalistic. Whatever we see within our borders is basically our connotation of what we call as a country or a nation. But it goes beyond when our country was actually occupied and colonized by the Spaniards, right? So we learn to accept that our thought of being part of this culture, which is just a subgroup of a larger culture in the entirety, is to being called as a Filipino. We just adapted that during the time of colonization. So now we have the concept of Filipino society from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, because we share same commonalities, right? Same traits, same norms. Though there are differences, but majority is we belong to basically most of most of the things in our culture, right? Okay. Now, functions of socialization. It enables the preservation and continuity of social values, characteristics, and norms from one generation to another. It explains both cultural maintenance and cultural change, enables the individual to grow and develop into a socially functioning person. It is a means of social control by which members are encouraged to conform to the ways of the group by internalizing the group's norms and values. Now, to sum it up, the function of socialization is basically the continuity of what we have from the past up until the present. Say, for example, the Philippines just started developing the writing system when we have a contact with our neighboring countries, right? It is known to be that the concept of baybayin is basically an influence from a Hindu Arabic tradition to when we started writing, but majority of that is not widespread in the Philippines at that time, or the early Philippines at that time, because we normally have oral tradition, right? That every knowledge, indigenous knowledge, cultural knowledge that we have is being preserved and transferred consciously and unconsciously by our society through an oral tradition, through songs, folklores, things that we are speaking of with anything that there is in our society at that time, right? And it just transformed during the time when we have been occupied by the Spanish, and then people started to develop the Western type of writing system, and then we, at a glance, we were able to write also our own history based on the experiences of our people from the past. All right. So again, it's just a continuation of a generation. It's very important that when you belong to a social group, it will develop a type of character which you are accepting with in order for you to continue to exist with them, right? Because if you don't accept a cultural characteristics or a tradition coming from that society, then basically you are a deviant from the society, that you do not belong, and then you have to maybe find another path, or basically you will be kicked off by that particular social group because you don't belong to it. No? Say, for example, in a classroom, and you have a transferee students, and if that transferee student don't really acknowledge everything that this group, your entire class, are actually doing, then basically he or she would become a deviant, right? He doesn't really accept whatever traits and values inside the class, and then he does not participate anymore. And that's why he might be left alone. He might not, or she might not have friends at all, and then he or she would start skipping classes, and then eventually would drop out because he or she felt doesn't belong to the class, right? So that's how deviancy works if you belong to a social group, okay? And it's very important in a social group to pass and accept each of its characteristics, traits, cultural traditions, in order for this society to continue to exist in the next generation. All right? Okay. All right, so we have to talk now about gender socialization. Now, the individual male or female within each culture acquires gender through socialization. The theory that socialization is the key factor in establishing gender identity seems to be validated by studies of intersexuals, neuter persons, incomplete genitalia. These studies prove that gender is not inherent, but culturally acquired. So we've talked about that, right? That we prefer to be us based on how we have been culturally raised by our group, or in particular to our society. In the Philippines, we're very accepting with the LGBTQ, right? As of this generation, we have been seeing acceptance, a wide array of acceptance, that there are another gender besides male and female. And we're very accepting, even from before, right? That this ideas or movement of LGBTQ is not that prominent, or is not that, shall we say, popular. But today, because social media, because of globalization, because of the influences coming from the West, basically we are very tolerant. But at some point, we have the tendency to steal, to exercise discrimination with the LGBTQ, right? Because at some point, still the country does not really accept at all the idea that the society that we're living in is not literally belong to a patriarchal society, neither to a matrilineal or matriarchal society, but it belongs to everybody. As long as we do accept that everybody gets the same equal footing, then I think we'll be able to gain better freedom, understanding of freedom, which would reflect to development and growth of this country, right? So eventually, slowly, we will be able to achieve fairness and equality as long as we accept it. And I think, since this discussion is fairly a discussion of gender in school, it should start from the school, right? Or maybe aside from the school, it should start first from the family, and then it should be echoed outside the very basic form society. From the family, it should re-echo in other institutions that actually talk something like this, where children at a very young age should understand that whether they are not straight male or not straight female, that they belong to homosexuals or the LGBTQ plus, still they are accepted with this society, and they can actually gain respect and could actually achieve the full potential of them as being them. Okay? All right. All right, so this is an example of gender socialization. In the Maasai tribe in Africa, they have a patrilineal society where the head of the family or the head of the tribe of that village is basically coming from a man. But we have also a Kasi tribe in India where it has a matrilineal society, that the head of the family or the leader is actually a female. All right, so we are also questioned now, being competitive, nature or nurture. So again, if we talk about gender, the answer is it comes from nurture, right? Because the moment a group or the society that we belong to actually nurture us, coming from the characteristics of traditions and cultural values and norms that we are introduced to, that would develop what kind of gender usually do we accept with, right? Okay. All right, so let's talk about type of socialization. We have deliberate or conscious. When a person are explicitly and directly taught the norms and values, the social expectations and obligations of the group. So that is deliberate and conscious. Most of the time in our family, we are being told that this should be your role because you are a boy, or this should be your role because you are a girl, right? So inside the family, we are given already a deliberate or a conscious gender role. And this is one of the best example of gender socialization. We are being put into a test to whether we are a boy or you are a girl, right? Now, beyond the context of being a boy and a girl, if a boy portrays a very feminine side, then here comes an idea of LGBTQ or homosexuality. The problem is, some of the families do not really accept the idea that there are other genders that a person or a boy or a girl can actually follow, right? And because some of the families do not accept it, sometimes there are severe punishments to this boy and girl. And that's quite alarming, and it's not acceptable anymore in our time, because again, who are we to judge a person? Who are we to really put something in his mind or her mind which he or she doesn't really like, right? We have to let our children choose whatever they want, as long as they don't harm other, or they also accept equality with the other people that surrounds them, and that is good. Okay. Another type of socialization, we have non-deliberate or unplanned. When individuals learn the norms and values by themselves from observation in the various group they came or come in contact with. So at some point, when you just let everything that flows around you comes into you, then that is unconscious or non-deliberate or unplanned type of socialization. That eventually you just realize that this is what you want because you have been shaped slowly and gradually by the influences of the people that surrounds you, or the surroundings that influence you, coming from where you are or what status of socioeconomic life that you have. Then that would eventually just come with you in no time. All right. Okay, so moving on, gender socialization is the process of learning the social expectations or gender norms and come to develop an internal gender identity. We've already discussed that. An example, a tendency for boys and girls to be socialized differently. Gender roles, like what I said, a set of behaviors, attitudes, personality, and characteristics expected and encouraged of a person based on his or her own sex. That's why, if you've noticed, if you have a child or if you have your siblings who are younger than you, usually your parents might find pink as a color for girls and blue for boys, right? If you're talking about toys, usually boys receive cars, even pistol guns or toy guns, trucks, and for girls, usually dolls, um, kitchen toys, right, or cooking toys, so things like that. Okay, and that's actually part of telling and providing gender roles to the young generation or to your younger siblings. And eventually, it would make an effect to their psychological capacity to understand that they can actually become as tough as men, because girls can actually play cars or play pistols or whatever that they would like to play, as long as we don't limit them from doing so. Okay, and same with boys, they can actually do the cooking, right? And they could actually appreciate women, because as far as we know, boys are actually quite attached with their mothers. And if we introduce them to toys who actually, portrays, a motherly characteristics of that toy, I think that's actually good. Because there's a study that boys and girls would actually see and choose their gender preference as late as 6 or 7 years old, right? Below that, they are still trying to develop. Okay? They're still trying to develop what kind of influences and what kind of gender they would like to adopt. Okay. Now, questions for reflections. These are just basic questions that you could actually think of. What are the gendered messages in your home? For example, girls could, boys could, girls couldn't, boys couldn't, right? So if we say girls couldn't actually play toy guns because that's for boys, or vice versa, boys couldn't play dolls because that's for girls, or couldn't wear pink because those are the colors for girls. Okay, so think about it. Another one is what roles and behaviors were expected in your home because of your gender. If you're the kuya in the house, you're supposed to help your father, maybe fixing anything inside the house, or maybe going or probably joining him with some of the works, especially in time of pandemic. You can actually help doing men's work, which usually portrays in the household, right? Or for females, they could normally share the domestic or domestication inside the house, right? Or domestic roles inside the house. Okay. Were there consequences for not allowing gendered expectations? So think about it inside your house. What did you see as models of women's roles, workplace, or work and place? What did you see as models of men's roles, work and place? What were the lessons of your early years in school? Sorry. What models of maleness and femaleness did you see? And last one, what were the lessons of your teenage years? How did you see yourself in relation to maleness and femaleness? What did you notice around you? Right? All right, so the second one, let's talk about the theories of gender socialization. Now, social learning theory developed in psychology from the legacy of behaviorism. Behaviorism claimed that behavior in humans was learned. So behaviorists were interested in discovering exactly how we learn those behaviors. Their primary answer is that we learn through a process of rewards and punishments, or through a carrot and a stick approach. So you understand, right? Reward and punishment. Say, for example, in your elementary years, you're rewarded because you get a perfect score in your test. But if you fail the exam, you get a 0 points, you get to have a punishment. For rewards, you probably get maybe 10 peso or 5 peso or whatever request that you wanted with your parents. But as a result of punishment, because you get a 0 or a failed score in your test, would probably be severe, right? You get to be probably punch, or probably beaten by stick or whatever, or probably you would be denied with your request, right? So this is just part of behaviorism. So when a moment that a behavior is repeatedly done to you, you probably end up adapting or acquiring that set of behavior, right? Now, according to social learning theory, we learn through selective rewarding, withholding of rewards, or punish of behavior. Okay, just like what I said. Now, gender socialization works according to social learning theories by rewarding the children for engaging in sex-type behavior that is consistent with their assigned sex category. Say, for example, since you are a boy, I will give you a toy gun, and I'll give you another reward if you just play and love the toy gun that I gave you as a gift, right? So eventually, every time that you present a boy with a particular toy that gives him a reward, that if I play a toy that was given to me by a person, which is for us adults, is gender or sex appropriate, then I would be given another reward, and that would continue, and then eventually you'd end up, knowing that the gender that you like is basically based on the behavior elicited to you when you were younger. Okay, right? Now, social learning theories added that conscious intent on the part of the agent of socialization was not necessary to the process. Latent learning can take place due to the way children tend to imitate those around them, regardless of whether they will be rewarded or not for that imitation. Moreover, children are more likely to model themselves on same-sex individuals by paying more attention to same-sex sex peers and forming a stronger bond with same-sex parents, modeling and imitation. So in general, the behavior that we can adapt from the gender that we are choosing right now, or that we are right now, is basically coming from modeling and imitation. Usually, for females, they model their mom, right? And if their mom is a model doing household chores, then basically the female does the same, right? Try to imagine your house right now and think, what are the roles of your kuya inside the house, and what are the roles of your sisters and you inside the house. Try to think if both of your sisters does only and probably get a lot of favor of doing chores that she basically copied or imitated from your mom. And then try to think of your brother, if most of the time all of the work that he did or he does comes from copying the work of your dad, of your father. And if it does, then basically you have given or the parents, no, the adults in your house have set up what kind of gender socialization your household has followed. And that comes from the idea of behaviorist. Okay. Now, a critique here is that on identification, children experiments do not always pick a same-sex playmate to model, nor do always identify with a parent of the same sex. That is correct. The role of targets of socialization is very passive. So there's a critique. When you let children play, they basically play even with their opposite sex. There's no problem with that. Again, I have read research before that at least a child would probably know what kind of gender he or she would be choosing when he at least or she at least reaches around 6 to 7 years old. But below that, they would normally don't have an idea of what kind of gender they would follow. They will just play around. So this is the critique for social behaviorist theory. Okay. Next, we have cognitive development theory. Emerge as a critique to social learning theory. We've talked about social learning theory. Now let's talk about cognitive development theory, which is a critique of the social learning theory. Now, Swiss theorist Jean Piaget directly contracted social learning theory by emphasizing children's active role in their own socialization. Accordingly, children were not little adults, but were fundamentally different in the way they think and understand the world around them. So basically, we were thinking that if we put and play something that is very synonymous to what adults do, that they basically follow it. But for Piaget, he actually experimented that there's a different knowledge set and cognitive development of the child, which he or she would understand and do it on his own. Okay. Now, this was adapted later on by Kohlberg to create a new psychological theory of gender socialization, commonly called cognitive development theory. There are stages. The first stage, gender labeling, approximately 2 to 3 years old. The knowledge that one is male or female due to their anatomy. Second is gender stability, 4 to 5 years. The belief that their own gender is permanent. Gender constancy, the understanding that gender will not change despite changes of physical appearances. Example, women or woman wearing pants is still a female. I mean, it's still a female. Sorry, it's a female. It's a female. Now, the children value their gender identity positively and try to behave only in the ways that match their conception. That is right. It does not dismiss the importance of agents of socialization, but locate much more the power in the process of the socialization with the target actor. So again, gender constancy. This is a time where approximately, the age of a person or a child is probably reaches 6 and more. This is where the time they understood that even if they change whatever the physical appearance that they wanted to change, still their gender preference would not change anymore. If they wanted to pursue being a straight male or straight female, that's it. Or becoming a homosexual, that's no problem with that because they already know what kind of gender socialization they wanted to follow. Okay. Now, the critique for cognitive development theory is the difficulties explaining the ability of the child to adapt a gender that is valued in society. Empirical studies also show that when children below 7 years old are put in a group, they are fairly invested in gender, which is in contrast to the theory's claim that gender constancy is achieved at 7. So this is the critique. Say, for example, cognitive development theory believed that there's no changes anymore when they reach 7 and above. But they were able to find out that 7 years old below would actually have, would elicit an understanding that they could probably choose whatever they want gender they wanted to. Okay. The next one we have gender schema theory. Its proponent, Sandra Bem, questioned why sex became the important organizing principle around which children built their identities, rather than other readily available categories such as race, religion, or even eye color. A schema is a cognitive structure and network of associations that helps to organize an individual's perception of the world. It helps us organize incoming information perceptions from the outside world. They serve as a kind of starting and organizing function, a file folder. Now, schemas are ways of organizing information, but they also become, as Bem pointed out, lenses that shape the way in which we see the world. A gender schema, then, is a cognitive structure that enables us to sort characteristics and behaviors into masculine and feminine categories, and then creates various other associations with those categories. Gender schema theory brings us back to the balance between the importance of the external agents of socialization and active targets shaping their own process of learning gender through the mechanism of gender schema. To make it a clarity, it is just a file folder, right? That we accept and receive every information that we have. Then eventually, we take a look at the file of all the informations and influences that we have experienced, that we have acquired all throughout the time. Then eventually, we would find a characteristics and behaviors which is in very masculine and feminine categories. That means that we basically, when we check our cognitive development, we basically lean on to a particular gender preference that we want all throughout the time, right? Say, for example, that your socialization is basically that when you grow up, you already have a lot of exposure coming from your father, your uncles, or every male in your household or in your society, right? And you're exposed to plays like basketball, which would normally end up played by men, or any influences of the sports that inclined with men that would transform you as what kind of gender that you are actually following, and vice versa with the females as well, right? Now, psychoanalytic theory, another one by Nancy Chudrow, begins with the importance of women's status as mothers and uses principles from Freud and others in the psychoanalytic tradition to explain the ways in which, gender becomes deeply embedded in the psychic structure of our personalities. There are two important concepts. Again, psychoanalytic theory. Now, psychoanalytic definition is the way in which a child modifies her own sense of self in order to incorporate some ability, attribute, or a power she sees in other around them. Ego boundaries are what help us figure out where the stuff called me stops and everything else begins. The theory suggests that we are not born with ego boundaries, contrary to Freud, rather than they are something we learn and develop in early childhood. Translate to men having stronger ego boundaries than women. Now, Chudrow took Freudian theory's emphasis on women's problematic development and flipped it on its head, arguing that some ways women's psychological development is less tense and with difficulties than that of men. Psychoanalytic theory versus tendency of Freudian theory to normalize masculinity while problematizing femininity. Now, the critique, gender socialization happened at a very early age, resulting in a relatively fixed gender identity by the time we are about 2 to 3 years of age. Essentialist in psychoanalytic theory implies that because gender differences become deeply embedded in the structure of our personalities, they are part of our essential natures and difficult to change. Right? Moving on, identification occurs for both boys and girls with their mothers initially. On ego boundaries, in this very early phase of our development, we have no sense of ego boundaries between ourselves and our mothers, or infants do not see themselves as separate from their mothers. Eventually, though, infants see that even the most dedicated of mothers has other concerns beyond her infant. And psychoanalytic theory focuses on how boys and girls resolve the tensions caused by this realization. Chudrow argued that because mothers themselves have already internalized a sense of gender identity, they experience their infant daughters as more similar to them than their infant sons. On the same unconscious level, mothers then push their sons away in a way that they do not push their daughters. This also explains why men having stronger ego boundaries than women. So psychoanalytic, it comes from still an influence from your paternal influences. Your mother, as part of this experiment, would normally have a stronger bond and connection if you are a girl or if you're a daughter than of you are with men. That's why if boys are being pushed by the mothers in a sense that their connection is not really that much connected or bonded with, then as for this theory, it evolves and it gives them boys or men eventually to have more ego than of females. Okay, so we've already know the disparity on how we develop this kind of ego than a female. All right. Now, in the absence of this kind of strong relationship with other men, masculinity is learned by boys through the use of cultural stereotypes, rather than through the kind of direct observation that girls experience with their mothers. Two important points of theory. It explains not just how gender socialization occurs, but how the same process of gender socialization recreates itself across generation. It helps to explain the subordination of women through the development of masculine personality. So again, let's go back to the idea that, of course, if you are a mom, you would normally choose between a son and a daughter. You are more affectionate, again, for this theory, to your daughter than of your son, right? You are more connected to and affectionate to with your girls or your daughters than of your sons. And that would lead to the sons to be more, aside from it creates a little bit of ego or more ego, and it also develops a masculinity side of that person or that boy, because it has to, in order for that person to develop and survive, an idea that he has to be strong because this is what is expected to me. And I am not that much protected, just like my sisters, when my mom are actually protecting them, because I have to be the man in the family, right? All right, now, in continuation, let's see this one. This is just an example. Okay, so for child rearing, the socialization of persons into a given gender begins at the moment the child is born. Correct. Boy or a girl. There are 4 stages in child rearing on how we visualize the gender of the children. 1, we have manipulation. Boys, visual stimulations. Girls, verbal stimulations. So that's why in this type of experiment, you'd be able to understand that why girls are quite great verbally than of men, because we observe them that they are men or boys don't really have much of expertise or exposure or time when we talk about verbal languages or the moment that this is being introduced to them. But boys are more on the visual stimulations, right? Another one, we have canalization. Parents channel the child interest. Example, car for boys, doll for girls. So since I'm a father, all of my interests are probably linked to a man things, right? Say for example, I want my child, my son, to play football or to play basketball, because this is what I am into as a boy growing up. Vice versa for females, since she's a mother and she has a daughter, she wanted to portray some of the characteristics or the traits that the mother have, right? So basically, because the mother is learned with domestication inside the house, and normally it is being passed to the daughters as well, right? 3, we have verbal appellation. Brave boy and pretty girl. So if babae would possess a stronger kind of character, then tawagan na to siya tomboy, di ba? Or if a boy would have a little bit of a feminine side, tawagan na to siya, uy, medyo pinapay, right? Or if a boy really portrays a very strong character, then we call it a brave boy, or we call it strong boy, and vice versa. All right. Last one, we have activity exposure. Domestic chores for women, mechanical and other boy stuff with men, right? So carpentry, any kind of hard labor is appropriated with men's work, while domestic chores and other household chores are appropriated with female stuff. Okay. All right, now this will be the last part. Let's talk about how gender socialization portrays and touches in schools. Right now, socialization in schools which touches sustainability, substantially on the informal or hidden curriculum, is a critical dimension of schooling through which educational setting may introduce changes in social perceptions or, conversely, continue to produce traditional values and attitudes. This socialization covers a wide array of practices ranging from administrators and teachers' attitudes and expectations, textbook messages, peer interactions, and classroom dynamics to the greater environment. So again, school as an institution holds a very strong influence with regards to gender socialization, right? Now, inside the school, it's very important that we see figure or a strong male figure, because as we know in the Philippine setting, our school are basically female dominated, and then we have a greater part of the LGBTQ community, especially with um, with homosexual males, right? Where it really gave an importance of imitations to the homosexual students as well, which is actually good. But also, part of the study is that we also need to have a strong father figure or male figure inside a school, because the number of students inside a school most probably is there are plenty males than of females inside a school, right? However, if each of these males doesn't have strong male figure inside the house, they would probably end up being ambiguous on what responsibility should a male do. Because first, in a Philippine setting, most of the fathers or male figure inside the house would normally go outside to find work, and then after a day of work, they'd end up inside the house in the evening and have very little conversation on how the day was for both the father and the son, right? So that's what's very critical inside the school, that we have strong presence of male figure as father figure, because we have a large number of males, right? And these males, in particular, should be given at least a role model that they can actually follow while they are not inside the house. That's very significant. There's no problem with female figures because inside a school setup, there are a lot of female um, teachers, right? Where females can actually follow and be influenced with. Also with LGBTQs, there are quite a couple of LGBTQs members inside the school that our LGBTQ students as well should follow. Okay, right. Now, gender socialization in child-friendly schools. The study examined gender socialization of boys and girls in grade 1 to 5 and 6 in selected Philippine public schools under United Nations Children's Fund, or UNICEF, strategy to set up a child-friendly school system. So the study aimed to see whether and how gender advocacy and concerns are integrated in schools supported by the UNICEF Country Program for Children 5. The second component was a rapid exploratory study of the learning environment in 6 CFSS model schools to obtain descriptive and snapshot information on gender socialization, primarily through on-campus interaction of students, teachers, and administrators. All right, so these are the schools where they get the number of the population as their respondents. Now, the findings of the study. Generally, teachers' instructions to the students were gender fair. Generally, right? Except at one school where the math teacher separated boys and girls in a contest. Right? So there's now an idea of a boy and a girl in competition, and gets the idea who get to have a better result of math contest. Right? Second, we have the teacher in Salazar Elementary School said that the pupils had become conscious of their sexuality, and the girls requested the separation even in sitting to avoid being teased by boys. Right? So we have that. These references of gender gap. Solution, since na gender gap, is to make the boys realize that the girls were uncomfortable with what the boys might see as normal and harmless behavior. Now, this is very important and significant. You see, if the boy continues to tease women, that would be normalized until they grow up, right? And then they will see that females are inferior and that they have a strong power over these women because they have been doing that since the very beginning or at a very early age, okay? So it's very critical for teachers, especially in the lower years, in elementary years, to acknowledge gender respect with regards to women and men, or I mean to boys and girls and to the members of LGBTQ as early as that age, because they should be properly told on what kind of person they should be as part of treating everybody equal. Okay, so again, you have to make sure that this will be addressed, especially if you will be teaching lower years in the future. Now, findings on the instruction and communication. One teacher at the Tugos Elementary School said in class, "Who wants to read? Let's have a boy. Boys have louder voices." Again, gender gap. Now, such remarks discourage girls' initiative because you've already picked a boy than letting everybody, stand and try to find your focus on. Probably the girls have something to say too, but why would you choose a boy first, right? Or probably vice versa. Although the teachers claimed that they were gender sensitive, they preferred boys to carry out certain tasks. At Tugos Elementary School, the science teacher introduced the boys to burn paper and twigs for an experiment on physical and chemical change. Nang lalaki mo ipasunugan, di ba? Why not girls? In Bulhao Elementary School, a science experiment required the students to boil a cup of water over a flame. The boy held the cups while the girls watched because we were thinking that this is dangerous and this is a boy's job than a female's job. So that's gender gap in a practice of gender inequality. Now, findings of the study of the classroom materials and teaching aids. Two pictures from Agdao Elementary School depict the teacher as a female and a farmer as a male, reinforcing the idea that men and boys work in the fields and that females become teachers. Or again, if we put this into perspective, that male do the hard labor while the females does the household chores, taking care most especially with the children, right? Because a teacher is basically the second parent who takes care of the children. Though the idea of being a teacher is far beyond that, right? We're basically jack of all trades. We do everything inside a class, okay? So other pictures show the seller, a sewer, and food server as female, and the busboy as male. Posters, see? These are the posters seen, which reflects most of the pictures found in that research are portrayed by boys. All right, so findings of the study, quotations are, displayed on walls and cut out letters. Can you see? On curriculum, home economics and livelihood education lessons are gender sensitive. These are reinforced by teachers' injection of principles such as, it doesn't matter if males or females shop, father and mother should shop. Males and females know how to shop, their duties are equal, right? So in home economics, they emphasize that no matter what kind of gender that you have, you can actually do the same chores like the other female does, right? So if you're a male, you can actually do shop and do the palengke, right? There's no harm in that, or there's no shame in that. No gender gaps were seen in math and geography, history, civics, and social studies lessons as topics were geography, mineral resources. English lessons showed gender bias. Teachers generally prefer using girls' names or sentences using a feminine pronoun. Okay. At Elias Macias Elementary School, the language teacher asked the following questions after the students had read the text on ants. How are ants similar to man? Again, generally, the teacher refers generally to a man, one to a woman. Do the ants and man, again, man, have one thing in common, so on and so forth, right? So again, this has seen as part of the result of the findings. For science and math, science lessons were biased in favor of males, same thing, right? Just like what we had in the languages. Now, classroom management. Girls and boys volunteered for class recitations and other class activities such as going to the front of the classroom. Role-playing, flannel board activities, show and tell, and a boardwalk. Leaders were chosen not on the bias of sex, but of responsibility. Leadership qualities, social maturity, friendship, popularity, and intelligence. Overall, teacher-student relationships were very good. For the findings and responsibilities and tasks assigned to students, teachers said that tasks outside the classroom ordinarily given to male students include reading, building fences, carrying water. Girls' tasks were sweeping the floor, wiping the furniture, and picking up litter of leaves. Okay, so again, these are actually gender gaps or gender, shall we say, inequalities that we are letting the students experience inside the classroom. Okay. Initially, boys and girls would tease boys asked to arrange flowers on the teacher's table as bakla, effeminate. But this rarely happens nowadays, correct? Because again, right now, the more diverse we have, the more accepting and tolerant we do. Discipline and restrictions. Generally, the students were well behaved, although teachers are not in school said that boys broke discipline more than girls. Okay. Interview with the school heads, 3 female and 3 male school administrators were randomly interviewed. The atmosphere of the interviews were generally cordial, spontaneous, and relaxed, except that one male administrator was uncomfortable discussing a gender. Dissemination of information about gender sensitivity. None of the school heads interviewed mentioned that they exerted extra effort of systematically disseminate information about gender sensitivity or gender fair education. Word of mouth. No school-based programs or seminar workshops were developed to help faculty understand gender sensitivity and its application. Right, so recommendations. Now, teachers should be enabled to help make changes that can make a difference not only in their students' lives, but also in their lives of whole family. For instance, counseling skills on violence against women and sexual exploitation of children. Another recommendation, teachers' capacity to promote women's and children's rights can be boosted by helping teachers build institutional linkages with government and non-governmental advocates. No amount of training will do any good if the trained people are unable to regenerate themselves and support from co-advocates. That is right. All right, so basically that's everything about gender socialization in school. We've talked about its basic definition of what gender and socialization is. We've already talked about the theories backed by the idea of gender socializations, and then socialization in school, right? An experiment or a research conducted by UNICEF in order to see whether schools in the Philippines, based on the selected schools and its respondents, do have problems with gender inequality. As far as you can tell, well, the result actually works properly, and the result basically gave us an idea that it's not that rampant in the Philippines to have very problematic acceptance of gender. But again, right at this very moment, though we are speaking of gender equality, still there are a lot of people experiencing problems with gender issues, especially with the rise of LGBTQ plus advocates who are actually trying to fight for equality for men and women as a whole. Okay. All right. So let me stop presenting so I can go back to the main page. All right. So that's our discussion with places and landscapes. It's very important that we understand not just the majority of the population, but also who are the population and what are its social struggles that the population is facing to. Okay? All right, BSSC 2, I will see you next meeting. Hopefully, we'll be able to see each other before the finals. And don't forget, you have still due papers for your modules. I am planning to end the outputs for the modules just for module 10. Module 11 and module 12 will no longer need for you to submit anything at all. All you have to do is just to read as part of your review for the exam. This is basically in relation with the other subjects that I'm handling to with you as well. It's a little bit easier for you, okay? Do proceed now, starting to create or make your projects with my subject so that before the end of this term, you'll be able to have and then submit this to me. Okay? All right, sige. I will see you in the next day for our online sync for the places and landscapes. Goodbye.